It began with a quiet journey to Balmoral, one that was never placed on the official calendar and never explained by palace aides. Yet those who noticed Prince William's sudden arrival sensed something unusual. Hours later, he emerged from a private room visibly shaken, his composure gone. What had he found inside Balmoral? And why were senior royal figures suddenly speaking in whispers about a final message left behind by Queen Elizabeth herself? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For years, Balmoral had been more than a royal estate. It was the place where the late Queen found peace, where family wounds were hidden behind tradition, and where decisions too delicate for London were quietly carried through the corridors of power. So, when Prince William arrived there without ceremony, without announcement, and without the usual public explanation, those close to the household immediately understood that this was not an ordinary visit. Reports suggest the matter began when a sealed item from Queen Elizabeth's private archive was quietly brought forward, protected under strict instruction and meant for one person only. Not the king, not the wider family, William. That detail alone changed everything, because inside the monarchy, nothing is accidental. A sealed message does not wait in silence unless someone powerful wanted it to be opened at the right moment. Palace staff were reportedly told to maintain complete discretion, and even seasoned aides, used to secrets and pressure, seemed unusually tense. Then came the moment that sparked the whispers. William, known for holding himself together even under brutal public strain, was said to have left the private room visibly shaken, as though the words he had read had reached into a part of him no crown, title, or duty could protect. This was not the reaction of a prince handling paperwork. This was the reaction of a grandson confronted by the voice of someone he had lost, someone who had shaped him, tested him, and perhaps warned him about the lonely road ahead. Soon, rumors began moving through royal circles that the note contained deeply personal guidance from Queen Elizabeth, not only about grief, but about responsibility, family, and the future of the crown itself. And the more carefully the palace tried to contain the story, the more powerful it became, because silence has always been the monarchy's loudest confession. But what made this message so powerful wasn't simply who wrote it, it was the extraordinary circumstances under which it had been preserved. Long before the world mourned Queen Elizabeth's passing, there were whispers that she had prepared certain private documents for the future. Most were believed to concern matters of state, but among them was reportedly one deeply personal note, carefully protected and destined for a single reader. The question was simple: why did she wait until now for William to receive it? For a monarch who understood silence better than most people understood speech, written words were never casual. Queen Elizabeth belonged to an age where records mattered, where duty was preserved in ink, where private guidance could carry more force than a public command. Across decades of crisis, scandal, and change, she had learned that spoken promises could be denied, softened, or forgotten, but a sealed note endured. And Balmoral, her beloved Highland refuge, was the one place where such a message could survive untouched by palace noise. It was not simply a residence. It was her sanctuary, the place where the crown felt less like ceremony and more like blood, memory, and burden. That is why the reported existence of this note sent such a tremor through royal circles. If it had been placed there deliberately, under special instruction, then it was never meant to be discovered by accident. It was waiting for the right season, waiting for the right pressure, waiting for William to become the man who could understand not only the love behind it, but the warning buried inside it. Palace insiders have suggested that the message carried more than sentiment, and that possibility changed the entire meaning of the moment. Because if Queen Elizabeth wanted only to comfort her grandson, she could have done so privately long before the end. But if she wanted to prepare him, to steady him, to remind him of what the monarchy demands when grief and power collide, then the timing becomes chilling. William received the note not as a carefree grandson, but as the heir standing closer than ever to the throne, surrounded by family tension, public scrutiny, and the heavy shadow of a changing reign. The sealed instructions, The careful preservation, the quiet release, none of it felt random. It felt like the late Queen had reached across time itself, choosing the moment when her voice would matter most. And for William, that realization may have been the part that cut deepest. This was not just a memory from the past. It was a summons from the woman who had shaped the future he could no longer avoid. As speculation grew around the note itself, attention shifted to the relationship that may have inspired every word within it. Among all Queen Elizabeth's grandchildren, William occupied a unique place. He was not only a grandson, but the future of the institution she spent her life protecting. Behind palace walls, their relationship was built on trust, duty, and countless private conversations. And now many wondered whether this final note was the culmination of everything she had spent decades teaching him. From the beginning, William's life carried a weight few children could ever understand. He was loved as family, but also watched as destiny. Queen Elizabeth understood that burden better than anyone because she had carried it herself. Quietly, relentlessly, through storms that would have broken weaker figures. That was why her bond with William was never ordinary. It was tender, yes, but also serious. It was shaped by affection, but sharpened by responsibility. She did not simply see the boy who visited her at castles and country houses. She saw the man who would one day stand where she stood, facing a nation, a family, and a crown that forgives very little. Over the years, insiders often suggested that their private conversations became part of William's quiet education. Not lessons delivered in grand speeches, but in measured words about service, restraint, patience, and survival. When royal crises erupted, when headlines grew cruel, when family loyalties fractured under pressure, the Queen's guidance reportedly remained steady. Endure, protect the institution, never let personal pain become public weakness. And William listened. He evolved from a grieving son into a disciplined heir, from a young prince shaped by loss into a future king, increasingly aware that duty was not a costume to wear on public days, but a burden carried in silence. That is why the note struck with such force. It may have gathered every lesson she had ever given him into one final message, a private inheritance more powerful than jewels, titles, or estates. Because the Queen's greatest gift to William was never privilege. It was preparation. She had shown him that the monarchy survives not through noise, revenge, or vanity, but through endurance. Through calm when the world demands reaction. Through dignity when the family itself becomes a battlefield. And perhaps as he read her words at Balmoral, William realized that his grandmother had not merely been remembering him. She had been handing him the final piece of his training. A command wrapped in love. A farewell, carrying the force of a royal charge. The boy she once guided was gone, and in his place stood the man expected to guard everything she left behind. Yet the deeper William read, the more it appeared the message was not focused on the past but on challenges still waiting ahead. Some messages comfort, others challenge. According to growing speculation, Queen Elizabeth's final note may have done both. Behind its warm words reportedly lay a series of warnings about the pressures of the crown, the dangers of division, and the sacrifices demanded of those destined to wear it. For William, those warnings may have struck closer to home than anyone realized. Because by the time he reached this part of the message, the note was no longer only a farewell from a grandmother. It had become something heavier, almost like a private royal briefing written in the language of love. The Queen, who had survived family scandal, constitutional strain, public anger, and personal heartbreak, understood that the monarchy is never threatened by one storm alone. It is weakened slowly, through division, pride, impatience, and the quiet belief that personal pain matters more than public duty. That warning would have carried enormous force for William, a man who had already watched family wounds become global headlines and private trust become a battlefield. Reports suggest the note urged unity, but not the fragile kind built on silence and pretending. It pointed toward responsibility, toward the painful discipline of holding the family together without allowing the crown to be pulled apart by emotion. And there, perhaps, was the brutal truth William could not escape. The future king does not inherit only palaces, titles, and applause. He inherits unresolved arguments, old grief, public expectation, and the impossible demand to protect his children from the same pressures that shaped him. The note reportedly touched on sacrifice, and that word alone may have cut deeper than any command. Sacrifice had defined Queen Elizabeth's reign. It meant choosing the institution when the heart wanted escape. It meant staying calm when betrayal burned. It meant knowing that every family decision could become a national test. For William, those lessons were no longer distant history. They were warnings for his own life, his own marriage, his own children, and the monarchy he would one day lead. Palace insiders have whispered that he was overwhelmed, not because the message was cruel, but because it was true. It named the burden he had been carrying in silence. It reminded him that George, Charlotte, and Louis were not only children of privilege, but future witnesses to the cost of duty. And it forced him to confront the one reality every heir eventually faces. The crown gives everything, but it also takes something in return. What Queen Elizabeth seemed to leave behind was not fear, but preparation. Not despair, but steel. Yet even steel can wound the hand that holds it. And as William continued reading, the emotional force of the note reportedly sharpened into something far more personal. But one particular section of the note was said to affect William more deeply than anything else. For years, William has been known for his discipline and restraint. Publicly, he rarely allows emotion to surface. Yet those closest to the situation claim the note contained a passage so personal, so unexpected, that it shattered the careful composure he had maintained since his grandmother's death. In that moment, the future king was simply a grandson grieving once again. The power of that passage reportedly came not from royal instruction, but from memory. It was said to look back on William not as an heir, not as a public figure, not as the man expected to carry the monarchy forward, but as the child Queen Elizabeth had watched grow through joy, loss, confusion, and responsibility. That difference mattered, because the world often sees William through the hard frame of duty, but the Queen had seen the full story. She had seen the boy grieving his mother. She had seen the young man learning how to survive a life he did not choose. She had seen the husband, the father, the prince, and the future king slowly becoming one person under impossible pressure. Reports suggest her words acknowledged that burden with a tenderness William did not expect. And perhaps that was what broke him. Not criticism, not command, recognition. The kind of recognition that arrives too late to answer back to, too late to embrace, too late to turn into one more private conversation. For a man trained to hold his emotions behind palace walls, the note may have reopened every sealed chamber of grief. Queen Elizabeth's death had already marked the end of an era, but this message made her absence personal all over again. It was as if the voice that had steadied him for years had returned only to remind him that he must now stand without it. Witnesses reportedly described William as visibly affected afterward, and in royal terms, that phrase says more than it appears to. It suggests the masks slipped, the careful control weakened. The prince who had endured public scrutiny, family rupture, and the slow pressure of becoming heir was suddenly confronted with something no training could soften, a final blessing wrapped around a final goodbye. The note reportedly recognized not only what William had become, but what he had sacrificed along the way. That would have made every word heavier. Because success inside the monarchy often comes at a private cost, and suffering is rarely allowed to show. Yet in that quiet moment, the balance shifted. William was not performing strength. He was receiving it from the one person whose approval had always carried the weight of history. And as that emotion settled into him, grief began turning into something sharper, something steadier, something that pointed beyond the past toward the duty still waiting. And as the emotional impact settled, another realization began to emerge, one with profound implications for the future of the crown. The note was not merely a farewell. According to those familiar with the discussions surrounding it, it may have served as a blueprint for the future. Hidden within its reflections were principles that had guided Queen Elizabeth through decades of triumph and turmoil. Now, those principles appeared to be passing directly into William's hands. And this was where grief began to transform into command. The message reportedly reminded him that monarchy is not sustained by popularity alone, nor by emotion, nor by the loud approval of the moment. It survives when duty stands above personal interest, when public trust is protected even at private cost, and when continuity is treated not as an old habit, but as the lifeline of the crown. For William, those ideas were not abstract. They were suddenly personal, urgent, and unavoidable. He was no longer simply remembering the Queen's reign. He was being asked to carry its discipline forward. Reports around the note suggest that Queen Elizabeth's reflections may have drawn from the hardest lessons of her 70 years on the throne. How to endure scandal without surrendering dignity, how to allow change without breaking tradition, how to love family without letting family consume the institution. That balance had defined her life. Now it appeared to be defining William's future. The message reportedly pressed on the importance of protecting the next generation, not only from public pressure, but from the emotional damage that comes when royal childhood is swallowed by destiny too soon. That would have struck directly at William's deepest fears as a father. George, Charlotte, and Louis are not merely children growing up inside privilege. They are growing up under history's shadow, and William knows better than anyone how heavy that shadow can become. Perhaps that is why the guidance felt less like a memory and more like a plan. It offered a path through uncertainty: stay steady, protect the family where possible, protect the crown where necessary, and never confuse attention with respect. In that moment, William's view of his future role may have shifted. The throne was no longer a distant inheritance waiting somewhere ahead. It was becoming a responsibility already pressing against his life, his marriage, his children, and every choice he made in public and in private. Queen Elizabeth's final gift, then, was not only emotional comfort. It was strategy wrapped in tenderness. It was a reminder that leadership inside the monarchy is often quiet, often lonely, and often misunderstood until history finally explains it. William had entered Balmoral carrying grief, but by the time he absorbed the message, he may have left carrying something far more powerful: a renewed sense that his grandmother's reign had not ended completely. It had been entrusted to him in principle, in warning, and in silent expectation. Yet the significance of the message extended far beyond William alone. It touched the entire royal family. As word of the note quietly spread through royal circles, its influence reportedly reached beyond Balmoral. Family members began reflecting on what Queen Elizabeth had represented and what her final wishes might mean moving forward. For some, the message offered reassurance. For others, it served as a powerful reminder of responsibilities yet to come. And for William, the first person who understood the depth of that burden was Catherine. She had stood beside him through public storms, private grief, family fracture, and the relentless pressure of preparing for a future neither of them could escape. In this emotional period, her support reportedly became not loud, not dramatic, but steady, the kind of quiet strength that does not demand attention because it is already holding everything together. William's perspective as a husband and father may have shifted sharply after Balmoral. The note did not only speak to the prince who would one day be king. It spoke to the father trying to protect George, Charlotte, and Louis from the shadows that had followed him since childhood. It spoke to the husband who knew that duty can test a marriage, stretch it, and force private sacrifice behind polished public appearances. And it spoke to the heir who understood that every choice he made now would echo through another generation. Among senior royals, the message reportedly triggered reflection of a different kind. Queen Elizabeth had been the great anchor, the figure who made continuity feel almost effortless, even when the family was cracking beneath the surface. Without her, stability had to be chosen again and again, not assumed. That realization carried weight. It reminded the family that the monarchy survives not simply because it exists, but because each generation agrees to protect it from pride, resentment, and carelessness. In that sense, the note became more than a private inheritance. It became a mirror held up to the entire House of Windsor. For some, it may have strengthened old loyalties. For others, it may have exposed uncomfortable truths about responsibility and restraint. But for William and Catherine, it seemed to sharpen the mission ahead, to build a future where their children understood duty without being crushed by it, where family bonds were protected without allowing weakness to threaten the crown, and where Queen Elizabeth's example remained alive not as nostalgia but as discipline. The emotional power of the note lay in its reach. It connected a grandmother to a grandson, a father to his children, and a family to the institution that had shaped every sacrifice they had ever made. What began as a sealed message in Balmoral was now becoming something wider, quieter, and far more consequential, a renewed sense that the crown's future depended on unity, steadiness, and the courage to place legacy above personal comfort. But the most remarkable part of this story wasn't the note itself, it was what happened after. William left Balmoral. When Prince William arrived at Balmoral, he came searching for answers. When he left, he carried something far greater. The note Queen Elizabeth left behind may never be publicly revealed, yet its impact appears undeniable. In a single moment, it connected the past, present, and future of the monarchy through the man destined to inherit its greatest responsibilities. After everything that had unfolded in that private room, William's departure reportedly felt different from his arrival. He had entered carrying uncertainty, grief, and the weight of unanswered questions. But he left with something quieter and stronger: purpose. The message had not erased his pain, nor could it remove the pressures waiting for him beyond Balmoral. Yet it seemed to steady him in a way only Queen Elizabeth could have done. Her influence, even after her death, remained woven into the very fabric of the crown. That was the power of the note. It did not need to be made public to matter. It became a symbol of continuity, a reminder that the monarchy is not carried by one generation alone, but passed hand to hand through duty, sacrifice, and trust. For William, the meaning was clear. His future role was no longer just something approaching from a distant horizon. It was already taking shape inside him, sharpened by loss and strengthened by the voice of the woman who had spent her life defending the institution he would one day inherit. Reports suggest he emerged with a renewed understanding of what leadership would require: calm under pressure, courage during division, and the discipline to protect family without allowing personal emotion to weaken public responsibility. And in that realization, the next chapter of the monarchy began to feel less uncertain. It would not be built on spectacle. It would not be driven by noise. It would be shaped by legacy, duty, and the quiet strength of a family still learning how to move forward without the queen who had held them together for so long. The note, whether ever revealed or forever hidden, now stood as one of those private royal moments that changes everything without needing announcement. It reminded William that grief can become guidance, that memory can become mission, and that the crown's greatest power has always been its ability to endure. Queen Elizabeth's final message may have broken his composure, but it also rebuilt something deeper inside him: the resolve to carry her example into a future filled with pressure, scrutiny, and impossible choices. And perhaps that was Queen Elizabeth's final gift, not instructions for a king, but the reassurance that even in her absence, her guidance would never truly leave him. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.